Good afternoon and welcome to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles and I am your host here in Harlingen, Texas in the Rio Grande Valley of deep South Texas. Got a great program for you lined up today. Our El Paso correspondent Julian Resendiz is going to be joining us a little later in the program to talk about the new and latest developments in the water situation happening right now between U.S. and Mexico. We've got some words from the President of Mexico and, of course, Julian, who's been covering this situation for years now, will be bringing us that latest update with lots of new information. So we're looking forward to speaking with him in just a little bit. But as always, let's go ahead and start today's program by taking a look at what's trending across the border. Starting with U.S. Border Patrol Chief Gregory Bovino is back in Chicago running the Trump administration's targeted immigration crackdown. Now, Bovino oversaw Operation Midway between September and November that Homeland Security says led to more than 40,000 arrests of undocumented migrants. Now, News Nation, our partners, have learned Bovino is returning to Chicago for a second round of crackdowns. The original operation earlier this year was met with lawsuits, opposition from people who live in Illinois, and officials, including the mayor of Chicago and the governor of Illinois. While Border Patrol agents return to the nation's third largest city, others will remain in New Orleans, where Bovino says only 350 migrants have been arrested. In Portland, Multnomah County leaders doubled down on their sanctuary city status. On Friday, they declared a state of emergency due to the rise in immigration enforcement, which they say has sparked a mass fear in that area. Leaders talked about a resolution they will consider this week, which would essentially add more to what the county can do under its current sanctuary city status. County commissioners will also consider setting aside $250,000 to help families directly impacted by federal immigration enforcement. No word yet on where that $250,000 would come from. We'll stay on top of this and keep you posted on any developments, especially once we figure out where they're planning to get that money from for that fund. In El Paso, Texas, protests continue over conditions at a migrant facility at Fort Bliss. In September, a Washington Post report noted that a leaked internal ICE inspection found the immigration facility violated over 60 federal detention centers in just the first 50 days of it opening. White House officials have since condemned those reports.
These are not criminals. These are people that came into America to try to better their lives, just like your past family members and my past family members. All of us come from immigrants. These are people just trying to make their lives better.
A number of human rights groups recently sent a letter to ICE officials asking them to stop detaining migrants at the Fort Bliss Center. Now, despite the cold temperatures, advocates for immigrants and asylum seekers rallied in upstate New York on Monday outside of a local immigration office. A local congressman joined that protest against what they called aggressive immigration enforcement. Karina Dominguez has the story.
Rosemary Harrigan says she became close to a family seeking green cards.
I've been friends with an Afghan family for a long time. They are wonderful people. They are wonderful, wonderful people.
She says one of their children had to appear at the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services office off of New Carner Road. Harrigan called Congressman Paul Tonko's office, asking him to hold this rally today, anticipating the worst.
Because if she was taken, I was really frightened that she was going to be taken. But we were able to get an attorney to come with us. We came in, everything. The people that are here, USCIS, they are wonderful. They were wonderful to her. It's ICE.
A great majority of innocent people who are playing by the rules, seeking their version of an American dream, denounced and denied by this administration and treated cruelly. Masked individuals that haul them into a car and whisk them away, and we have no concern, we have no awareness of where they might even be taking them.
Tonko calling for legislation that would advance information exchange so that families know where detainees are and if they're transferred. And legislation that says if you're showing up for your naturalization processes, that you can't be targeted.
They're setting people up as victims, having them come to a system of a process, and as they're there, targeting them as they're going through the process for naturalization. Unacceptable, un-American.
Harrigan describes what she wants.
I want to be so proud of my country, and right now I am so horrified by much of what's happening.
Harrigan says she wants a permanent solution for the friends she now considers family. Reporting in Albany, Karina Dominguez, News 10 ABC.
And that is a look at what's trending across the border. Stay with us, because after a very quick break, we're going to be joined by our El Paso correspondent, Julian Resendiz, to talk about this developing news coming on the U.S.-Mexico water debt situation. You're not going to want to miss it. We got some good news if you've been waiting to hear about what's going to be next as far as your farms, ranches, and everything else that depends on that water treaty. So stay with us. Border Report Live is back in 2 minutes. Welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. Facing a threat of increased tariffs, Mexico has now agreed to pay a portion of its outstanding water debt to the United States. We started talking about this last week, you may remember. Now, the U.S. Department of Agriculture says the U.S. and Mexico have reached an agreement to meet the current water obligations that are part of a 1944 water treaty. And this latest agreement calls for Mexico to release more than 200,000 acre-feet of water to the United States. This was said to have started on Monday. And now we wanted to bring in our El Paso correspondent, Julian Resendiz, because he has been covering this issue for many, many years. Some would even say he's an expert on this topic, especially considering our experts are with the IBWC. So outside of that group, he's probably the #1 person to talk to about this. And he joins us now with the latest on this agreement. Hey, Julian.
Rudy, yeah, you're right. For the past few days, we've been telling you that a deal was imminent between the two governments. Now, let's put the water debt into perspective. Every 5 years, Mexico is supposed to turn in a huge amount of water, equivalent to 1.75 million acre-feet to the United States. That water comes from tributary basins in northern Mexico that are supposed to feed the Rio Grande. What's been happening, especially in 2023, in 2024, is that Mexico told the U.S., sorry guys, we're in extreme drought, and the water deliveries during those 2 years were minimal. Now, fast forward to 2025, we have a change of government in the U.S., and President Trump basically said, well, whatever, where's our water? So what we've had in the past 11 months now is an effort by Mexico to turn in more water. And you can see we have a chart here that shows how those deliveries from Mexico, all of a sudden at the very end, at the bottom, the black line, all of a sudden those deliveries increase. However, if you see the red line that's a straight incline, you see that Mexico was already in arrears. So whatever efforts they made in the past 11 months are minuscule compared to the water they owed. So here we are today. As of last week, the Trump administration said, all right, so the period to turn in the water has passed. You did not turn in the water. When are you going to be turning in the water? The government of Mexico said, well, the treaty, if you read the fine print, says that we can just roll over our whatever water we didn't turn in the previous 5 years to the next 5 years, and period, end of sentence. And Trump said, no, I'm having none of that. So he threatened Mexico with a 5% tariff on top of 25% tariffs already in place for free trade agreement covered items. So that pretty much kickstarted things in Mexico. There were some high-level meetings last week. And then finally, the big announcement by the U.S. Agriculture Department that Mexico had agreed to say, all right, we'll pay you as soon as we can, as opposed to like sometime in the next 5 years if it rains. So there's a lot of congratulations going around. The Texas Agriculture Department reacted to this announcement. They thanked the Trump administration for holding Mexico's feet to the fire and pretty much saying, well, if it takes some strength, if it takes some strong arming, and that's going to do it, that's great. Let's just make sure that Mexico fulfills its commitment. And it is a substantial commitment. If we go back to the chart, Rudy, you will see that the 200,000 acre-feet that Mexico is supposed to be turning in this week will only raise that little black line a little bit. It represents about 20 to 25% of the water that Mexico has turned in. So what about the other massive amount, which is upwards of 700,000 square feet, acre-feet? Well, according to the deal worked out by the two governments, what's going to happen now is that the U.S. is going to be monitoring rainfall in Mexico, making sure that whenever the Mexican president says, well, it didn't rain, we have no water, that the U.S. can say, all right, we monitored your rain, it didn't rain, you have no water. And we have some sound here from the president of Mexico who emphasized that it's not that we don't want to pay you, it's that we don't have the water. Let's listen to her if we can.
Que no tenemos o afectando al
It is not that we are giving away water we do not have, nor affecting human consumption or agriculture in Mexico. They wanted the water by December. We told them we could not do that. We reached a deal for more time. We also emphasized that it isn't that Mexico doesn't want to give you water. It's that we did not have sufficient rain.
So, really, to put it in simple terms, it's a start. It's a big victory for the U.S. that Mexico agreed not to just roll over the water for the next 5 years, but to actually make some payments. It's going to be a challenge and a constant effort by the U.S. to actually monitor, to hold Mexico accountable for its water supply. And now, if I may, I'll tell you a little bit more detail about the deal. Like Sheinbaum just said in that little clip we played, Trump said, okay, you give me water by December 31st or the tariffs go in place. What they granted was another month. So now by the end of January, the U.S. and Mexico are supposed to formalize the deal that says, okay, we will deliver X amount of water by this X amount of time, provided we have this X amount of rain. And yes, we will both monitor what's going on. Now, as far as the water cycle, I believe that people are saying this is kind of good news because we have a few months still before the next agricultural cycle. So maybe by then we'll have enough water to avoid another disastrous planting season and maybe have enough crops this time around. Now, I will also tell you that some of the water that Mexico is supposed to deliver this week should already be stored in either Falcon Lake or Amistad Dam down there by South Texas. We'll be monitoring to see if lake levels, if reservoir levels have been indeed going up, and if Mexico is making the payments it says it will. Otherwise, the threat is still there. You have avoided the 5% tariff for now, but if at any point you don't make good on this deliveries, however meager, however humble, the tariffs are back in place.
Let me ask you this, Julian, because I find it interesting that the U.S. says they're now going to monitor the rainfall in the country of Mexico to see if the rain is, or the water levels are actually what they say they are. Has that just been something that we've always taken at face value when we hear that from Mexico's foreign ministers and the president saying, you know, we've never verified any of that information when they say they don't have enough water?
I think this is more political speak. But as you know, political will has a lot to do with whether or not we get water. No, there are two agencies, two international agencies. One is called, well, they're both called the International Boundary and Water Commission. In Mexico, it's called the SILA. But they do constant monitoring of river levels. They do constant monitoring of how much water has been turned in. In fact, the chart that I just showed you comes from the International Boundary and Water Commission. So both sections kind of keep the technical data. That has never been an issue. What has been an issue is that if a U.S. administration says, okay, we understand, pay us whenever you can, that's the political element that comes into play. When another U.S. administration says, no, you got to pay, then that also influences what happens. So yeah, the monitoring has been going on. I think the message is a political one. We're watching.
As far as Mexico not having the water available when they tell us that, what happens if they truly don't have the water available to us? And in this situation, for example, we just heard President Sheinbaum say that we haven't had enough rain, but we're going to deliver X amount of water to you to try to keep those tariffs off of us. What happens to Mexico if they get into a situation where they just don't have the water for not just to deliver to us, but to, provide to their own people?
Well, what the current negotiations very clearly state is both of us have to be satisfied. We, the United States, have to be satisfied that this is going on. So there's going to be a lot more scrutiny, a lot more accountability. There's always scrutiny, like I said, from the agencies, the international agencies, but now we're talking at the political level. There's going to be scrutiny at the political level. And sure, if it doesn't rain, it doesn't rain. I mean, the numbers are not supposed to lie.
When it comes to this new agreement, how does that impact the 1944 treaty, if at all? Or is it just kind of something that is kind of baked into the treaty already, saying that this is allowed to happen?
There's always room for negotiation. Treaties are highly technical documents, but there's also some room for interpretation. And that's pretty much what's been happening, not just this past 5 years, but the previous 5 years, where Mexico also was in arrears big time. So there's a lot of room for interpretation, a lot of room for, like I said, one administration saying, we understand, no problem, and another administration saying, well, we understand, but there's a problem. So like I said, a lot of it has to do with political will. And right now, the U.S., the Trump administration, is showing a lot of political will to make sure that the water payments are made sooner or later.
You mentioned that the Texas Agriculture Department commented on this this revised agreement here. Did they have anything to say when it comes to the economy for Texas farmers and growers? And I want to go back to some reporting from our South Texas correspondent Sandra Sanchez about the sugar mill that closed down here in the Rio Grande Valley. As the Rio Grande Valley sugar mill closed after more than half a century, it generated $100 million annually. Was the only sugar mill in the state of Texas, one of only 3 in the nation, and it took hundreds of jobs and affected hundreds of more secondary jobs that were kind of supporting that industry here. Have we heard from any of those folks as well as the Texas Department of Agriculture?
Yeah, like I mentioned at the top of the show, there was a statement from the Texas State Agriculture Department, and what caught my attention from the statement was the phrase, holding Mexico's feet to the fire. Obviously, like I said, a lot of this is political, and this comes, like I said, at a very good time. Right now, we can store that water, we can have the water available, so when the planting season comes in a few months, there'll be plenty of water, and we can avoid the disaster that we've been seeing for the past couple of years. As far as the minutia of the treaty, there's always, speaking of minutia, what's called minutes or amendments. And there was just one such minute added very recently in the past few days, and it has to do with not with Mexico, but with the U.S. and the Tijuana River. Mexico primarily gives us water for South Texas farmers. The U.S. primarily sent its portion of the water up there near California, near those areas. So mostly this is a Texas issue, the lack of water payments from Mexico.
And when it comes to this agreement, then the negotiations happening, is there any more talk about when they go to renegotiate either this treaty or the USMCA or NAFTA 2, as some people refer to it, in talking about maybe adding these safeguards? I know you said it's a lot of political will, but maybe having it down in writing is something that could be useful, because I think, as you said at the beginning of this conversation, was that basically including a lot up for interpretation, but that basically the president said, no, we're not going to let you roll it over into next year, so you can go deeper into arrears to what you owe us. So is there any kind of discussion about making this agreement or parts of this agreement, rolling that into the next treaty or revisions?
Yes, absolutely. I think we've said it before in previous shows. There's a lot of chatter of things that can be improved, and there's a lot of chatter on the U.S. side, on our side of the border, about precisely putting some of those safeguards into the review of the USMCA. I think that's something that the Trump administration, if they're not going to do it, at least they're going to talk about it. They're going to converse with their counterparts in Mexico about it. But it's definitely, a weapon that the U.S. can wield and will probably wield to at least make sure that we get some water payments.
Now, Mexico, if I'm not mistaken, is already under a 20% tariff with some of those goods that we import from them. Is this kind of a sign that those tariffs are kind of strong-arming them if they're worried about an extra 5% getting tacked on?
Absolutely, and I do believe that they're worried because as soon as the president announced this new 5% tariff on top of the 25% non-USMCA tariffs, Mexico went to the negotiating table, and days later, we have this deal that will be formalized by the end of January. And supposedly we already have some water in our reservoirs coming from Mexico. So yeah, it is a powerful weapon when it is wielded, and this time it was wielded, and apparently we get some results.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your reporting today, Julian. We appreciate it. It seems it must be very interesting to be reporting on this topic for so many years and seeing such a big change come after so many years of covering it. So we appreciate you being here today, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you.
All righty. Well, stay with us. Border Report Live will be back in 2 minutes. And welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Midelis, your host here in Harlingen, Texas. A clash between ICE and protesters played out in front of news cameras on Monday. As protesters threw snowballs, federal agents used tear gas. Here's Esme Murphy with the story.
The first images were chaos, pushing, shoving, and screaming. We made our way to the center of the crowd and found a woman being held face down on the ground. People were screaming to let her go.
We kept yelling, she's pregnant, she's pregnant, she's pregnant. They put their knees in her, and we kept telling them, she can't breathe, let her up, let her up.
In the chaos, the woman who was handcuffed was suddenly being dragged by one arm as the angry crowd threw snowballs and screamed at the federal agents.
We first heard this raid before we saw it. We could hear people whistling. A lot of people around here have whistles that apparently is what people are carrying as they watch out for ICE raids in South Minneapolis.
Soon, more and more observers, neighborhood residents, people who heard the sound from Lake Street just 2 blocks away began gathering. And so did local law enforcement. We saw 2 Minneapolis police officers and a number of Hennepin County Sheriff's deputies arrive on the scene. At one point, it looked like a federal agent was pushed to the ground.
Yeah, it's unbelievable what I see right now. In our city, our neighborhood, yeah, it's kind of a little bit of war going on.
As ICE began using pepper spray, some people needed help clearing their eyes. As the confrontations continued, one man who had appeared to be observing was suddenly on the ground as the crowd kept chanting at the officers to let him go. We saw one federal officer tasing another observer. DFL State Representative Aisha Gomez was there.
Well, so an ICE agent is now shooting at this crowd with pepper bullets, we think. These are just like, look, everybody's coughing. You can see this is escalatory, right? So we all just had chemical munitions used against us by federal agents, including you as part of the press, right? So this is what we're facing in the streets of Minneapolis right now, is a full-on federal invasion.
That was Esme Murphy reporting in Minneapolis. Now, both the sheriff's office there and Minneapolis Police Department say they do not participate in ICE raids, but responded to the scene because there were reports of federal agents who were being attacked. Taking a look at another headline before we let you go for the day, the U.S. military said it has conducted lethal kinetic strikes, their words, on 3 boats allegedly smuggling drugs in international waters in the eastern Pacific Ocean, killing 8 men on board. Now, the attack was the latest in a string of attacks targeting what the U.S. is calling narco-terrorists. Intelligence confirmed that the vessels were transiting along known narco-trafficking routes in the Eastern Pacific and were engaged in narco-trafficking, is what the U.S. Southern Command spokesperson said. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth briefed congressional law leaders on this attack. Both men were on Capitol Hill as questions mount over the swift escalation of U.S. military force and deadly boat strikes in international waters near Venezuela. A congressional investigation is underway after a military strike in September killed 2 survivors of an initial attack on a boat allegedly carrying cocaine in the Caribbean. And that is going to do it for us today. For Julian Resendiz in El Paso, my name is Rudy Mireles here in Harlingen, Texas. We'll see you next time.